with cases where doing one thing causes something else to happen. Now, this might not seem like a very fruitful place to find interesting philosophical problems, but in fact, there are problems concerning causation that are some of the most persistent in philosophy. Beginning in the 1500s, natural science turned increasingly toward empiricism, which is the view that all knowledge about the world derives from and must be grounded in experience, especially sense experience. In order to assert a causal relation between two things, the empiricist view holds that this assertion needs to be backed up by observations. While it makes sense to make predictions about how things will behave based on equations and theoretical models, these, in the first place, have to be tested, and perhaps refined, against observations and measurements. You may note the difficulty this creates for any claims of supernatural causation, since supernatural causes, by their very nature, don't seem amenable to observation or measurement. On the empiricist view, both terms of a causal relationship, the cause and the effect, need to be observable or measurable. You can certainly hypothesize hidden or unobserved causes, but you can't have knowledge of them unless and until you confirm their existence through observation. Well, it may actually be more difficult than even this, but we'll come back to that. Let's start with some conceptual clarification. What exactly is a cause? The concept of a cause is generally paired with that of an effect, so it probably makes most sense to talk of cause and effect pairs. A cause and effect pair is a set of two events, but we need to distinguish a cause-effect pair from a set of events that are only coincidentally related. The 18th century philosopher David Hume suggests the following account of a cause-effect pair. First, the events occur close to one another in space and time. That is, on Hume's analysis, there's no action at a distance, and no delayed causation, unless the events can be connected by means of intervening events. Second, causes always come before their effects. There's no such thing as backwards causation. The arrow of causation goes one way in time. Some have criticized this part of Hume's analysis on the grounds that there may be simultaneous causation. For example, the Earth's gravity causes the Moon to remain in orbit through simultaneous rather than successive influence. Let's set this aside, just for now though. Third, and perhaps most importantly, Hume says that causes and effects are related through a necessary connection. The idea of necessary connection is where Hume thinks the idea of causation runs into trouble. This is because for Hume, the idea of necessity is a function of ideas themselves. For example, it is necessarily true that 1 + 1 is equal to 2. Why is this necessary? Well, because the idea of 2 just is the idea of a quantity that is made up of two ones. In philosophy, this kind of truth will come to be known as an analytic truth. It can be seen to be true merely by analyzing the meanings of the ideas or concepts involved. Perhaps the easiest kinds of analytic truths to understand are statements that are true by definition. For example, it is true by definition that a puppy is an immature dog. We can see this to be true by considering that adult puppy is contradictory. The reason this is problematic for causation is that statements of causal relationships are never analytic truths. This means, according to Hume, that there's a problem in accounting for the idea of necessary connection between causes and effects. It is always possible to deny any causal statement without contradiction. So, for example, suppose I tell this story. Once upon a time, the universe didn't exist. Then it suddenly existed for no reason. We saw with the first cause argument that many people find this scenario unbelievable. But it isn't logically contradictory, so it turns out that there is no logical necessity in the claim that everything had a cause. Or how about this one? Yesterday, I threw a rock at a window, and instead of the window breaking, it suddenly turned into butterflies that all flew away. No one believes that throwing a rock at a window will make it turn into butterflies, and we would generally say that this is impossible. but it isn't logically contradictory. Hume's point is that if we say the connection between a cause and an effect is necessary, we can't mean that it is logically necessary. But then, what kind of necessity is at work? And how do we get the idea of causal necessity? Well, if the idea of causal necessity doesn't come from logic or conceptual analysis, there's only one place left for it to come from, and that is experience. But now we come to the real heart of the problem, and that is that no judgment of necessity can ever come from experience. To see why, let's consider how we come to understand that two events are related as cause and effect. What happens is that first we experience the event that we call the cause, and we notice that the event we call the effect always comes next. That is, we know the events are connected because they are paired in our experience. I can't know that rocks break glass unless I observe rocks hitting glass followed by the glass breaking. Or perhaps more intuitively, I won't know that water turns to ice at 32 degrees Fahrenheit unless I repeatedly observe this happening. So causal judgments are formed from what is called inductive reasoning. I observe things happening a particular way, and I reason that because they have happened that way in the past, they will continue to happen that way in the future. But can I be certain they will continue to happen that way in the future? The British philosopher Bertrand Russell talked about the problem here by invoking the story of a chicken who every day notices the farmer has not killed and eaten her, and reasons, the farmer didn't kill and eat me in the past, so the farmer will not kill and eat me today. If you think about it, you might know of someone who repeatedly did something stupid with the false assurance that it would be fine because it had always been okay in the past, only to have things go disastrously wrong one day. Hume's puzzle is how we could possibly know that this isn't how all causal pairs really are. Remember that one of the questions Hume is trying to answer is, what is the difference between causation and coincidence? He says the difference is that in causation, causes and effects are thought to be necessarily connected. But the basis of this thought isn't found in logic or conceptual analysis, and it doesn't look like it can be found by experience either. But what's left? Hume says the idea of necessary connection between cause and effect is the result of mental habit. What he means is that our minds become habituated to expect certain events in connection with other events, and it is the feeling of expectation that underlies the idea of a necessary connection between causes and effects. There are different ways Hume scholars have interpreted this, but one is that connections between causes and effects aren't out there in the world, but rather exist only in our minds. I'm not going to press this point here, though, since I want to go back to the point that inductive reasoning never seems capable of yielding certainty. In fact, what makes us think that inductive reasoning is trustworthy at all? Ever? This is the so-called problem of induction, or more precisely, the problem of justifying induction. Notice that it is not an analytic truth that induction is reliable. That is, there's no deductive argument or logical proof of the reliability of induction. But this means then that if induction can be shown to be reliable, it must be shown to be reliable by inductive reasoning. But justifying induction by using induction is a blatant circularity. It therefore seems that induction can't be justified at all. I'm going to leave you to think about this puzzle. That's all for today. Bye for now.